Hello and welcome to Ready for Nintendo. It is February 15, 2024. I'm James Jones, joined today by Guillaume Bayette.
Hello, hello.
Mr. Greg Leahy.
Ahoy, hoy, everyone.
And the Iron Man himself. That's you, John.
John Lindemann, yeah, that's me.
Lon Gindeman is here.
It's great to be here, James.
It's great to have you, John. Lon, whatever your name is. This is episode 862, and we are going to get right into the new business with Guillaume, who has some new-ish business, I guess?
Yeah, I suppose so. Maybe if I bring up the Wikipedia page, I'll remember exactly when this game came out, but I'm fairly sure I'm playing it 2 years after release. It is Artraiser Rennaissance, which is a game that actually we did talk about when it was released. And by we, I mean Johnny Metz came in.
2.5.
2.5.
Yep.
Good Lord.
September 21.
That old. Anyway, so Artraiser Renaissance. So I started playing this because just last week, for the past couple of weeks, a bunch of Square Enix titles were on sale on the Switch, and this game never really went down, went under half its price. I thought, well, why not? Like, there's, maybe it will drop lower at some point, but $20 for this remake is probably good for me. And originally, when it came out, I was interested in playing it, but I did find it a little bit pricey. But also, I had played the original not that long before. And so Artraiser it's one of those games that, like, whenever like someone writes in with a question, like, what's a game that you could play like every year or something, my mind would go, oh, Artraiser. It's pretty short. I love that game. But then I actually try to do it, and I don't really make it past like the first couple levels.
It's really hard.
It's not that it's hard, but I get bored. I kind of forget about how basic the game ultimately was. And like you play through the first kind of angel sequence where you're playing like this angel hovering over a kind of SimCity like space, and you guide your disciples to build over here and over there and take down demon lairs, and but like all of that is very, very simple, very repetitive, and so it's a game that I have very fond memories of, but ultimately when I sit down to play it today, I realized, like, well, the platforming was very basic, and so was the sim aspects, and so I don't need to replay this anymore, but doesn't change that it was very good at the time. So I had played it just, recently before. I decided to wait on playing the remake, and the remake is kind of weird because it is, at the same time, it is fairly faithful to the original, but of course at the same time they're trying to add a few wrinkles to make it a little bit meatier, a little bit more interesting in 2021. And so, like I feel that for the most part, I think that they got it right, but I think I didn't have this opinion just like 2-3 hours ago. Like, the game is slowly growing on me. So the game initially starts out like the same way, like you play it, like it starts you off with a 2D action segment. They spruced up the combat, like in the original, it's very much like you jump and you swing a sword. And occasionally, maybe you can use some sort of magic spell that clears out the screen. But for the most part, like your character can jump, can crouch, and can swing a sword, and it's very like keeps going like ha 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 every time that he swings that sword. That's very annoying, and there's no finesse to any of it. Like you swing the sword, the enemy disappears, and it's rinse and repeat. It's less. It's not even as I don't know, satisfying like as a very, very early Castlevania game. So in this game, they've added a kind of a backward slide button. they've tried to add kind of you gain gems or experience points inside the level, and as you gain those gems, as you kill enemies, you know, it powers your character up, so you kind of have this incentive to fight every monster that you see, whereas, like, you know, in the original, I think they had points. You could get points for killing enemies, and like that's not really an incentive today. So, you know, like, instead they're just like, well, you know, you fight these enemies, you power up for the boss. So yeah, so the combat, a little bit more moves. You can hold up on the D-pad and, you know, swing your sword, and you'll do a upward slash attack, and so a few more moves. It's nothing earth-shattering, but it does add a little bit of depth to the 2D sequences. And they're fine enough. I have to kind of get used to the art style, because I didn't notice this when I was playing on the Switch itself, but then I moved to the TV, and it looks like maybe they were trying to go for a pre-rendered look, even though it's not. It's very weird. They've made some choices in this game, but sometimes the backgrounds are quite nice, with like the lighting coming from the back of the screen, basically, like from far, you know, past, like I don't know, like this forest, these woods, and like you can just see like the rays of sunlight kind of coming through like a forest that's in the background. Like, it's really nice looking, but your character and the enemies are a bit more, kind of old CG looking. It's a little bit off-putting. And then you've got the sim aspects, where, of course, they added some tower defense elements, but for most of the gameplay, it's actually playing the same. So what they did is that basically they kept the gameplay of the original, where you're the angel, you fly around, you guide people where you want them to build. But occasionally, and like, you're shooting demons that are flying around, that are coming out of these demon lairs, and you shoot them with your bow and arrows. But then occasionally that gets interrupted by some sort of enemy attack. So, like, these demons on the ground are going into town, like they're heading towards the center of town, towards the temple, and they destroy stuff as they go. And now that's a tower defense game, and you can't shoot them with your bow and arrows. What you're doing is that you've been building barricades, you've been building forts and towers, and hopefully, like, those will take care of the enemies that are attacking. But also, in that world, in that stage that you're playing, there's like one hero character that you can guide around, and so they can go and kill enemies, and they're very powerful, and that seems to be like most of the game. You just like, they're actually much more capable of killing the demons than your defenses and your towers are. So you just guide around this little character toward, around your city to go take care of, wherever the demons are gathering. And yeah, so those are fine enough. Like, I wasn't too crazy about those sequences at first, but now I'm in the second world. And now I can take the hero from the first world into the second world and use it. So now I have two hero characters that I can control at one time during those sequences, and it helps make them a little bit more interesting. You're like, it gives you more decisions to make. It's not a whole lot of strategy, but it's some strategy, and so that makes it a little bit more interesting than it was at the beginning of the game. Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's basically, like, I don't know what else to say about this game, except that they thankfully, I was afraid, like, in the first world, the classic sim music. Do 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 do.
The song.
The song
Yeah.
played on the loop. The loop is not any longer than it was on the Super Nintendo, but the gameplay of those sim stages, because they've been, they've added to it. Like, it takes much longer now. You're inside them much longer. And so the loop is fairly short, and I was kind of going crazy. I was like, I love this music, but for the love of God, just, I hope that this doesn't repeat every stage. And thankfully, it seems like there's some, unless I'm misremembering the original, I think that was always that tune for every sim stage. But for the remake, at least for the second stage, there's a new tune, and one that I don't recognize, so I'm pretty sure it's new. And I'm so thankful that they're switching it up. Like, they recognized at some point that, like, yeah, we can't get away with this. We can't just play that one tune for that stage every time, because, yeah, people are gonna go nuts. So that's good. The music, the old music and the remix music are by Yuzo Koshiro. So very good. I don't know if he's made the new tunes. I would assume, but
Probably.
maybe not. But like the new tunes is very good, as far as I can tell. And yeah, like this game's music is important because, of course, like there's this story about how this game in particular, Artraiser on the Super Nintendo, it was an early game, and apparently it shamed Square Enix's like sound design team and composers with its quality, because they released Final Fantasy IV, and the instruments in that game were kind of shit. And yeah, like apparently they went like, I can't believe that this Artraiser game is just like so good. Like we can't do this again. We can't have them show us up like this again. So yeah, like the music, very good. But yeah, like I think one of the things that I'm warming up to in this remake is that it interrupts you a lot. And this was true of the original game too. You would guide your little people around in the sim portions, and immediately, like after like 5 or 10 seconds, like, oh, like they're praying to you. They have something to tell you. Oh Lord. Lord Guillaume. Like, okay. So the game stops, interrupts, and like they tell you, like, oh, our son Timmy has gone to this blood lake and hasn't come back, and like, please give him this piece of bread so that he doesn't die of hunger or starvation. And okay, so like every time, like there's tons of interruptions as you're playing the sim segments, and those sim segments are longer now, but they've also got more interruptions, which I thought was a little bit annoying at first, but now I realize, like, maybe, you know what, like it's kind of part of the charm, This game was sim elements, it was 2D action, but I guess it was also like your little guys just like praying to you, being so helpless, and like, oh, please, dry up these marshes so that we can build on this ground, and like you do it and they're happy, and so the added cutscenes and scenes where they pray to you, they talk to you, they're actually really well done, and I feel like they probably correctly understood that like those were important, that like they've beefed up the story by having hero characters, actually. Like each of these hero characters seems to have their own like troubles, and like I guess you help them regain their faith or whatever. So like there's new story in this remake, but also, yeah, like it's fairly well written. It's a very like kind of not Old English, but just like oh, forsooth, or tis, or I don't know, like anyway, like old-timey words that people don't use anymore. They go hard with like the kind of the old vocabulary, and it's kind of charming. It's kind of fun. And I guess I don't get enough of being called Lord Guillaume, or and being told that the people need my succor. So I don't know. It's kind of fun. I guess that's how I end this. So
Nice.
Yeah.
Succor, Succor. Of course, you mean Guillaume.
Yes, and
Yes.
yeah. Did I pronounce it right?
Yeah, I don't think there's any other way to pronounce it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. Okay. So it's one of those words you hear so often that
No, it's in my common word usage, definitely.
Mm-hmm. So yeah. So I guess like people might not. I guess I'm not really. Did I make it clear if I like this game or if I don't recommend this game?
No.
Well, that's probably because I'm still deciding. But for now,
fair enough.
Yeah, it's slowly growing on me. So maybe next week you'll have an answer.
All right, fair enough. I'm gonna step in here for a second because I don't really have any new business, but I do want to play a game with y'all. This will be a quick game, so it's not a big deal.
Like Mario Kart or Smash?
Faster.
Oh.
The eShop was particularly demented this week. We got another reasoning of courage, although now it's called Courage's Reasoning. I don't know. This one called Chewed Rice Balls. So we're really up in it now. But no, that's not what we're going to talk about. I have 4 games here. 3 of which are games that came out in the last couple of days. The 4th one is a lie. Not the 4th one in the order, although it might be.
Mm-hmm.
I want y'all to guess which one of these is the real or is the fake one. I'm going to give you the name and I'm going to describe them. I'm not going to use the text from the eShop, though, because it would be hard for me to come up with text as stupid as the text in the eShop. The first one is called Top Web Search 23. Why is it called 23? Who can say? Well, actually, I can. Because this game is about guessing which 2 terms had the highest search rating in the year 2023. There are 500 such scenarios available. Game number 2, Legendary Tales Stories. Legendary Tales : Stories. It's a hidden object game. That's it. That's all it is. There's no tale or stories. It's just a hidden object game. Number 4, Triple A Clock. Excuse me, Quadruple A Clock. Because we're here now. It's finally happened. The thing we all hoped for. They've added another A rather than making Triple A Clock 2. What does Quadruple A Clock do? Well, it promises that it supports OLED as a feature.
And it's a
on
clock.
Switch. And it's a clock. It's an HD clock.
Wow.
These are all features that this thing says it has, that it supports OLED, John. Why would that be important?
I don't know. I wonder what it did when it didn't support OLED.
Why would there be a Switch game that doesn't support OLED? Who can say? And the last is called Party Party Time 2. It is a Mario Party style game. And by that, I mean it is literally a Mario Party game where they have removed the Mario characters and replaced them with cardboard cutouts. It is the exact same mini games. Everyone in the image is from Mario Party. All of them, without exception. It's amazing. So, gentlemen, do you have a guess which one of these games is not real?
Well, yes and no. I mean, like, I actually pay attention to these releases, so I know 2 of the answers are real. I know it would be, flip of a coin for...
Okay. All right, what about you, John?
Is it maybe Party Time, or whatever it was?
Could be. Greg?
Yeah, the whole point of this exercise is that they're equally plausible / implausible, aren't they?
Correct.
So that's the problem. There's not really a sort of a great logical way to deduce which one. I mean, I feel like the quadruple A thing, the quadruple A, you know, featured in that concept featured in the last episode.
It
so
did.
That stuck out as a little bit fishy to me, but I don't know, maybe that stupid clock was the genesis of that thing in the first place. So you're gonna have to put me out of my misery.
All right. It is in fact quadruple A clock. But everything I described about it is real. It came from the description of the last AAA clock release. They really did put supports OLED screens as a feature.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. That was like, that's definitely got to be a real bullshit bullet point. There's no way you could craft something that nonsense yourself.
No, it's too stupid. It's one of those things where like, no, I'm not this creative. I have too many working brain cells to have thought to put that phrase there. But no, Party Time 2 is a real game where every game is just Mario Party on a system that already has many Mario Parties. It's truly an accomplishment. And yes, Hop Web Search 23 is real. And Legendary Tales: Stories just absolutely blew my mind. What a name. What a fucking name. It's just, it's beautiful. Like those weren't even the worst things that came out. There was a game that came out that was called Shooting Squares, and that's what the game is. You shoot squares. But this is, these are all like just stupid in the perfect way. There's a lot of AI image games this week too, like a lot of them, like a crazy number, including maybe this one. Dead Eyes Stare, Anime Girl, hentai title, all that shit. So, one day I'm gonna finish making my Dead Eyes Stared Anime Girl thing. We were discussing if you could take one of these like weird AI imaged anime girl games and then just put all Simpson quotes as all of the dialogue text. So, like, there's not a single actual, like, text in it. It's just Simpsons quotes the whole way down. But I don't know that Disney's lawyers might reach out. So, that dream will live unfulfilled. Anyway, on that note, speaking of dreams, John, what have you been playing?
You know, I have an Analogue Pocket, which is great for handheld games. So, and of course I didn't have a Game Boy, so I've been dipping into choice selections from the Game Boy library, and so I decided to finally play through Super Mario Land and Super Mario Land 2, which I've probably taken. I think Super Mario Land, I think I've played it at some point, maybe on something else, maybe on Steam Deck at some point, but I finally actually did sit down and play through it, and it's a weird little game. It is a very strange little game. The weirdest thing about it, the feel of the game, I could never really get a feel for the controls of the game. The strangest thing about it is how if you edge off of a, like say like a pipe, you drop like a stone right down. There's no momentum. Say like in the original Super Mario Brothers, if you're standing on something, not even a pipe, just anything, your momentum will carry a little bit. Like if you push the joystick to the right, your momentum will carry and you will not drop straight off the edge. In Super Mario Land, you drop straight off the edge, and it is just the weirdest thing. It is such a strange control choice that they would not just try to mimic the original Super Mario Brothers and the feels of those controls completely.
It felt very much like Super Mario Land wanted to feel different.
Yeah.
Like, because there's a lot of weird stuff in that game. That's like
flying levels and stuff and submarines and
of course, a different team made that game.
Yeah.
And that's probably part of it. Yep. But it is very peculiar is probably the only way I can describe it.
Yeah. And only 4 levels, and each level has 3 sub-levels each, which is also, I mean, of course, it would have to be, at that time, Game Boy cartridges would have been significantly smaller, but I still find it very, very weird that, number one, that they just didn't get the original Super Mario team to build it.
Well, what would they have been making at that time?
Super Mario Brothers 3.
Okay, yeah.
Because don't forget that was an 88 game in Japan, I believe.
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers 3, and of course Game Boy is 89. So yeah, they were busy making one of the most successful celebrated games ever. And your Koi's team already won with launched the Game Boy. They pretty much did everything first party, didn't they? They were also busy creating like soccer and golf. I forget exactly which sports they had at launch, or but they was the alleyway, like all this stuff. Like they all that was their job. That's what to populate it. So yeah, you kind of feel like that probably played a role in how it ended up being this very sort of small, quite unusual. Some of the things you would think are quite obviously technical limitations, like they hadn't yet sort of got comfortable with what they could get out of the Game Boy, so they played it safe, like the changes to the way that, what they call it, the Super Ball instead of the Fire Flower.
Yeah, it behaves differently.
And then the Koopa shells, like they just blow up. They don't bounce, because again they probably thought, oh well, can the Game Boy handle these, the enemy bits just like bouncing off scenery? Is it now? No.
It'd have been so smeary.
They're still kind of dangerous the way that those shells were, but instead of it being because they bounce back and forth and they come back and hurt you, but then you can also use that to your advantage. But they blow up now, and with
the blast radius too.
It all feels pretty kind of painfully like, let's rein the scope of this in, and you do what we can within that for launch, and hopefully it'll do the job. And it did do the job, I think. I remember I didn't have a Game Boy either when I was when it was new, but I've said before, when you'd get to the end of term, other kids would bring their Game Boys in. And I just ripped through Super Mario Land just like in just that day, just like, yep, okay, I've seen it. So it was very quick, but it was, kind of fun. And I guess, what were anybody's expectations of how long or substantial portable games should be back then? Obviously, as the Game Boy's life went on, you got some very, kind of, substantial titles from Nintendo and others, but at launch, it was you're probably not that disappointing. Again, it depends. It depends how much somebody had been playing, Super Mario Brothers, and how closely they expected a portable sort of Mario game to be in relation to that. Yeah,
and then you have Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins, which is vastly different.
Significantly more technical.
Yeah, significantly more technical. It's, you have multiple power-ups. You have the rabbit ears. You have different kinds of levels where you're going through, goo. There's, where you can hang in the air as long as you stay inside this one particular area, which represents the goo. There's like different ways, different exits out of a level, different paths that you can take. Different worlds, like right now I'm in the one area where you're up in the tree, and so there's 4 different areas, but there's also optional areas from the looks of it. Vastly different, much better, feels much better, much more like a Mario game than the first one does. The first one to me feels like almost like some sort of, the first Super Mario Land feels like almost like some sort of fan-made game or something. Whereas this feels more like a legitimate Mario game, larger sprites, more familiar jumping mechanics, like a better feel, a more Mario-like feel when you're jumping around and moving your character. Still a bit floaty. I still had to, there was an adjustment period trying to figure out how I could jump, where I could jump, all of that, but feels much, much better. I'm not too far into it, but just feels much better. And so I don't know if I'm enjoying it more, but it feels to me almost like the first Super Mario versus Super Mario Brothers 2, and I know the whole history behind Super Mario Brothers 2, but it feels kind of like that to me. But yeah, it's really interesting going through these old Game Boy games because they're all new to me, completely new. And I do have expectations, that things would be, and I think that was one of the reasons why I never picked up a Game Boy, is because I knew innately that they were just scaled down versions of NES games. So why would I buy a Game Boy? Just to get all these like B tier NES clones, like, like the not only the Super Mario games, but the Mega Man games were like that. All the Game Boy games were like that. They were just like scaled down versions of NES games, which I was never really interested in.
That's it. With Mega Man, at first they were just like, they had the Robot Masters from the NES games and stuff, didn't they? And then I think eventually they did more like original components, because they did loads of them. But obviously with Mario Land and 1 and 2, I mean, it's, it's different. They actually have like their own unique villains that, like, the Mario series has completely refused to invent new villains, basically, for many, or at least primary ones. You get your weird things like the rabbits that Guillaume spoke about last week, the Broodals, well, I think they were, in Super Mario Odyssey, but, no, so there was a certain amount of originality there, but I think it's telling that Tetris was the big hit. That was the killer app, the reason to have it, because that was a game that actually worked better in a portable setting, rather than just, let's take a game that's on consoles and either do like a direct adaptation or do something like it that still has to be kind of compromised to get it to work on Game Boy.
When did the NES Tetris come out relative to the Game Boy one?
I feel like there was some kind of NES Tetris before that, but that whole thing is such a tangled web that, especially because you've got like Tengen involved. Who, they're all unlicensed stuff and all. I think at some point wasn't there a Tengen Tetris that was on shelves and then it was ordered for them to be removed from shelves. So I don't know whether that was the only one that before the Game Boy Tetris or not, but yeah, it was, a mess, but equally, I think, even if however many years or whatever, Tetris had been around, in other settings, and the Game Boy clearly it made it somehow much more appealing for players, didn't it? Being able to play it in that way. Yeah.
So it came out slightly after the Game Boy Tetris that has the same box art. So yeah, they were basically being co-developed. This was the third Tetris for the NES, including the invalidly licensed Tengen one, and then one from Bulletproof Software of all fucking people.
Yeah.
Hank Rogers himself.
Yep, that's right. Obviously, he got the license from Paginoff, right? I mean,
and then it translated over to Nintendo.
Yeah, having like previously been doing like RPGs for Sega, the Black Onyx or whatever, and it wasn't it. And, so, it's kind of an interesting pivot, but there you go.
Because it was. For the NES, it was May 1989 was the Tengen one.
So, John, your experience. We talked about the Analogue Pocket before.
Yeah.
So I won't have you retread that ground.
Mm-hmm.
But these two games have been available on your Switch for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Super Mario Land is not. Super Mario Land 2 is.
Why?
It's very strange, isn't it? But yes, unless that's changed without my knowing, I am quite confident that that is still the case. Super Mario Land 2 is an NSO Game Boy, and of course Game Boy games are part of your standard NSO rather than expansion pack. But for whatever reason, Super Mario Land is not there yet.
I don't understand.
It is surprising. I mean, like Tetris is there, which was not. I mean, they both Super Mario Land and Tetris were, of course, on the Virtual Console that was on 3DS for Game Boy games.
Right.
But Tetris was delisted much sooner than the other games were, passed, with the closure of the shop, because it was only licensed for so many years rather than, the others being open-ended. But they got Tetris back. Why, you would have thought, as Super Mario Land was, I believe Super Mario Land, along with Link's Awakening DX, was like the launch game for the Virtual Console on 3DS eShop. So why it not only was not part of the first batch of NSO Game Boy games, but it's not even here, however many months how long is it that they've had Game Boy games? More than about a year or something? I forget exactly. But it's kind of crazy, to be honest. I mean, yes, it's kind of an insubstantial game, but it's a major part of Game Boy history. It should be there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely, it should be there. Like they figured out the Tetris license. Come on. Okay. Well, so John, what motivated you for these two, and where do you go from here?
Where do I go from here is a good question. If I could crack open the Analogue Pocket here.
I mean, it is a painfully obvious answer, but Wario Land.
I don't really like the Wario Land games, though. I'm not really a big Wario Land guy.
Have you played the first one, though? Because that is, it's a little bit different than what they became. Yeah. And it's also, but it's much more like comfortable in being its own thing and being a Game Boy game than Mario Land 2 was, which was very much like, okay, the kids like that Mario world, we should do something, as close as we can do to that, so it'd be interesting what you thought of it.
Yeah, it's funny, my save state here is, Ninja 5.0, which is very much Shinobi clone. Good, but I don't think it's worth all the money that it was on eBay.
No, that's its own bizarre set of circumstances how that game got to be so expensive. Although, it reviewed pretty well.
Yeah, it's a good game.
And then,
I once owned it and then traded it in.
Yeah, and it was, I think it was just produced in vanishingly small quantities, and then, it became this thing that people wanted. But yeah, obviously, it shouldn't really be taken as just like, oh, well, it must be incredible.
Yeah.
I imagine it's probably, something I would like to play, something like it, so it maybe would be a nice place to have it, but Konami can't even, it would be under sort of Konami's umbrella now, right? Because of the Hudson, because of them owning the Hudson stuff. Mm-hmm. But they just can't even be bothered to put out a lot of their own stuff, right? I mean, some of it's because they hold it off for their own collections to sell, just get their money that way. But there's a lot of stuff that they don't seem that interested in doing, but at least their licenses, things like Sparkster out now for other people to do, if nothing else.
Yeah, because I have Wario Land and Wario Land 2, and I've never played them. My opinion of it is very much colored by the Game Boy Color games, so or the whatever Wario Land is on the Game Boy Color. Yeah,
2 and 3 are the game. I like that. That's the immortal Wario thing. Whereas, he's now he can't die, and he can kind of go into these different states where he catches fire, he turns into a zombie, and all that kind of thing. The first one is more conventional than that, but it's also, decidedly its own thing relative to, Mario Land 1 and 2.
Yeah. Man, there's some funny stuff on here, like Bonk's Adventure and Bonk's Revenge. I played those on TurboGrafx 16, and those are not great games. I can't imagine what they're like on the Game Boy.
I had Bonk's Revenge on the Game Boy as a child. I don't know why.
I had Bonk's Adventure, and
Nice.
That was like a 20, maybe 30-minute game.
Wow.
Yeah, it seems about right. John, these very legitimate copies that you're playing
Absolutely.
on your Analogue Pocket.
Archival.
Yeah. I assume you've been going out and hunting for Game Boy games at local swap meets, and that's what you're
absolutely.
playing. Okay,
yes,
good.
Ripping them. It's just much easier to play in this form factor. Yeah, I know you understand.
Well, I mean, it's got the form factor of a Game Boy ultimately.
Yep.
So I'm trying to think like, what's a Game Boy game that you should when you're out at the swap meets, when you're out looking for things, you should play. And I'm thinking I've got one for. I think it's Kid Dracula. Another game I owned as a child. So this is. You may
already own it, John. If you own the Castlevania,
I happen to have it here in my library. I don't quite remember getting it at the swap meet.
The NES version is on the Castlevania collection that Konami put out, the anniversary collection. So that's nice that they did that, because that didn't come over. Like the Game Boy version came over to America, but the NES Famicom version did not. But there you've got a sort of localized version of that as part of the Castlevania Anniversary Collection that's on Switch and everything else. It goes for very low prices when it's on sale these days, and that was how I played it for the first time. I quite enjoyed it.
I actually think it's kind of shockingly competent in a very weird way. But it's a spin-off of Castlevania.
Yeah.
It is the kid of Dracula, but it's also very it's very puzzle heavy, but not in like a dumb way, like in an actual sensical, makes sense for you to do way.
Is it still walking around with a whip or some facsimile killing things?
No, because you are Dracula, so you have
yeah.
Dracula's powers. Like you could turn into a bat and stuff. It's interesting.
Well, you're Chibi Alucard, right? Really?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, you are still a vampire of some description.
Yes, yeah. So, but they do. I think they do make that connection, right? Because Alucard had already, debuted in Castlevania 3, which wouldn't have been too long before that, right?
Yeah, there's some things that you should keep an eye out on when you're back out at the swap meets, and I think that's one of them. I think you should also keep an eye on. There's a lot of weird shit that came out in Japan that we didn't get. That's like really interesting and goofy. Sunsoft made a platformer. I think this did come out called Trip World that you should keep an eye out for. It looks like an NES game to some degree. It's pretty easy, but
right,
it is
but didn't the kind of the DX version just come out this week?
Did it?
Yeah, I saw something go by. Like I saw some release.
I didn't. If this just came out this week, when I'm like, finally, I get to talk about Trip World on this. It was
on the Virtual Console, but they may only have been in Europe. I forget, or Japan and Europe. I think pretty sure Trip World came out on the Virtual Console somewhere, but of course, they're all gone now. If you haven't already got it,
no.
Okay, so I'm seeing reviews from December about Trip World DX, but maybe it just came out for PlayStation 5 and 4, but the Switch version came out a few months ago, I think.
I didn't know there was a Trip World DX.
Yep.
Wow. It's like a modern remake, I guess. Or is it not? Or is it actually is this real? I'm confused.
It's hard to say.
I hate this.
It's real. It exists, but I don't know if it's like the game but colorized or I don't know what the DX means.
It is a remastered version developed by Limited Run Games.
Okay.
So if you want to be original, you can go find that one. It's not great, but it is weird and it's cute and enjoyable in its own way. But I can't think of what other weird shit I had on my Game Boy library. Unless it's like We're Back, a dinosaur story, a game about dinosaurs who eat cereal. Fucking go for it. I don't know. Again, we've talked about this. My parents' ability to buy video games is par excellence.
Questionable at best.
No, you can't question it. Like the sheer hit rate of the madness. Like it had to have been deliberate. And to that degree, they're like artists. It's unfathomable. But yeah, I can't think of what other weird bullshit I had on the Game Boy. But those two are at least worth looking at. I think.
Also, you shouldn't miss the Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat 2. Probably one of the best versions of that game on home consoles.
It's very good. What was the Game Boy Color one? I had that.
Oh, I don't know. Or are you thinking of the Game Boy Advance one, Mortal Kombat Advance?
No, Mortal Kombat 4 came out for the Game Boy Color.
Wow.
You should look at that as well. It's fucked up.
Yeah, Mortal Kombat games were super sketchy back in the day. On a lot of platforms.
Yeah, but I put them on a Game Boy.
Yeah,
and have fun. Yeah, it's no good. Actually, you know what? If you're interested in continuing your Mario trip, Super Mario Deluxe, I'd be curious to hear what you think of that weird version of the game.
Yeah, I can check it out.
It is a Game Boy Color port of the original Super Mario Brothers with like some weird stuff added.
Yeah. I may
Got
have
like
the
lost
original-
levels,
the original
levels
cartridge of
in
that
there somewhere, which is, I mean, they might sand some of the rougher edges off some of those things from, the Japanese Super Mario Brothers 2. But
Yeah.
the thought of and I have played it quite a lot because it was a giveaway virtual console game on 3DS and promotion. I forget exactly how they worked it, but, so I did play it quite a lot on there, and the thought of playing lost level stuff, but where you can see considerably less of the play area at any
great.
given moment is not inherently that appealing, I would say.
So I wanted him to find out about the restricted view space on his own, but okay. There's I guess this is also the kickoff point for all those Game Boy Advance Mario games, where it'd be like Mario Advance 3, Super Mario Brothers 4, or some fucking bullshit.
Well,
Oh yeah, well, and they're all on the bloody expansion pack when, they don't that desperately need to be, because their original versions are present, on the Super Nintendo app, for instance already. Although they do offer some, specific elements, but that's what's more galling about Super Mario Land not being around, because like I said, you kind of double dip on some Mario games, but then on others you're just leaving it completely. I find that really curious.
All right, so they called the lost levels Super Mario Brothers for super players, which is accurate.
Oh yeah, no, they sold it for what it was, which was kind of like a level pack for people that thought, you know what, I've mastered 8-4 now. Let's give me what you got, do your worst, and they did.
But to unlock it, you have to score 300,000 points in a run of the original game, which is actually a lot of points.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they do. In Super Mario Brothers DX, you had to achieve something notable to actually unlock that stuff. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, and there's a fortune teller mode too, so you can predict the future with it. Wait, there's apparently a calendar hidden in the game. What the fuck? Why would you look at Yeah,
they were trying to turn the Game Boy into a camera with, back then, they were just doing a lot of things of us like, hey, your Game Boy, and just play games. You can, make funny little printout stickers for those photos in Link's Awakening, and
it supported that thing too. It supported the printer. And you could print icons of Mario, Luigi, Peach, Toad, Yoshi, Bowser. Toad's is bigger than everyone else's, which is weird. Also, the N64 logo and the Only 4. What the fuck? This game is weirder than I realized.
Yeah, Game Boy was a weird system. There was a lot of weirdness on Game Boy.
Yeah, this is
because games were incredibly cheap to make.
There's unlockable content for Game Boy Camera, including a get in or get out banner. What the fuck? This is so weird. Yeah, this is it, John. This is your future. I can see it.
Yeah.
You and the Game Boy camera hooked up to your Analogue Pocket. Why is there not not Game Boy camera, Game Boy printer? Why is there not an analog printer? I guess that's every printer, technically speaking. All right, well, anything else you want to say, John?
No, I think that's quite enough.
All right, excellent. Greg, you've been playing a game a lot. Well, sort of. Replaying parts of it.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll get to that. I do want to start with something. F-Zero 99, I finally encountered the secret tracks that they spoke about in one of the updates recently. So it's kind of interesting the way the way it happens, because I played it a fair bit and I hadn't come across them. And then one day, one time, I'm just at the menu screen where you've got, like, on the left-hand side, it just has the F-Zero 99 icon for the standard kind of race that you could do. And then on the right-hand side, you've got the kind of timed event stuff, like the different leagues or team battle, the things that kind of cycle in and out. And so I'm at this screen, and then this is almost like a sanity effect, right? It's like the icon for F-Zero 99 has this like little glitch out in its graphics. And you're like, I haven't seen that before. So you go in at that time, and sure enough, one of the you always get two sort of options presented to you, and all the other players that are in that lobby for which track you're going to do. But yeah, anytime you see that glitch on the front end before you go in there, then one of the options will be a secret track, just with like 3 question marks. And of course, as you would hope, the secret track won in a landslide. You rarely see, such a margin. Everybody, wants to play it. So yeah, the 2 tracks there, you've got one that's kind of based on Big Blue, which is way crazier than Big Blue. It's got like stuff like, like you could jump corners off ramps and corners that are mined up to high heaven and stuff like, it's much more sort of wacky. And then you've got a fire field kind of variant, which if anything is less crazy than the actual fire field, although that is like the last track in the game. That's how it was designed, to be the ultimate challenge at the end of the last cup or league or however they referred to it back then. So yeah, it's got a lot of the sort of signature elements of that, including the kind of the pit lane where you have to go wide before like the finish line if you actually need to reclaim health, which you definitely do in F-Zero 99 because it's such a rough and tumble kind of thing. But that was fun to see those and the way it was handled. It would be nice if they had more such stuff, really, especially considering, it gives you the latitude to, either amend or, wholesale create like tracks that are, you have this particular format, the F-Zero 99 format in mind. Obviously, the original tracks, they're pretty solid designs, I'd say. I certainly enjoyed them back then, but they weren't designed with the idea of, there'll be 99 cars and they'll all be trying to kill each other and all that. Like you can actually leverage that a little bit more with some of this remix stuff or new stuff. So it'd be nice if we get some more out of that, but yeah, I don't know. Plausible that is, because obviously, the participation is only likely to, drop with time, and you can do a certain amount to try and, prop that up. But at a certain point, you're also going to say, well, it's how worth it is it to, kind of, keep expending resources to prop that stuff up. So yeah, it's enjoyable while it lasts. We'll see how long it does. But yeah, the main thing that I've been playing is the Prince of Persia Lost Crown, which I've put quite a bit of time into it. It's been quite absorbing, and I might have made more progress, but for a particular issue. But we'll leave that to the end of the discussion. But yeah, obviously I already played the demo. So, talk about some of the basics, but, playing the full game and, some of the ways in which it's sort of changed, my impressions of it. First of all, obviously, like some of the elements of the combat we talked about, like, the kind of countering and whatnot, like it might remind you of Mercury Steam's Metroid kind of games, which is fair enough. But also, I think even though this is a game that's quite old in itself now, and I don't have the sharpest memory of it, I have to admit, but it also, in some sort of diffuse way anyway, has reminded me of the Strider reboot that I played on Xbox. I assume it was on PS4 as well. Because definitely the sort of, very super agile, nimble character kind of running around, the sort of, exploration based, but quite action heavy kind of worlds and all that. Like, I think there's definitely some similarities there, even though, like I said, my recollection of that game isn't that crystal clear, now. But yeah, the combat is definitely significantly bigger part than it is in the Mercury Steam Metroids, and it stays a bigger part. Like I said, I think with the Mercury Steam Metroids, you kind of it starts like a bigger deal, and then in Samus's, sort of progression to godhood, it becomes like, no, I can just jump through you now. I don't need to parry, Whereas this, there's still, a lot of powers that you gather and a lot of there's so many ways in which you can upgrade. I mean, it calls to mind the question that we answered not so long ago about, kind of like what qualifies as depth and what qualifies as like being convoluted. when it comes to things like skill trees and RPG elements and all that. Like, this has a lot of different kind of axes along which the character can improve, with like lots of different currencies and pickups and all that. And I can't help but wonder whether it could have been streamlined somewhat. I mean, not everything has to just be, you know, energy tanks and missile tanks and that's it. I'm not that, you know, wedded to just the way Metroid does it, or, you know, sort of like some of the kind of Metroid inspired Castlevanias. Although some of those also got quite, you know, when you think of like the Souls, you know, kind of systems in Dawn of Sorrow, Aria of Sorrow, or the whatever was got. Well, I can't remember what they called it in the Order of Ecclesia. You know, where they had something to do with the tattoos on her back or something as glyphs. I forget. Anyway, but you know, it's not the genre has had, you know, quite sort of more complicated like upgrade systems and collectible things before. But it did strike me as being a lot. You know, you got these like amulets that give you kind of buffs, but then, you know, they innately only give you kind of weak buffs, and you've got to spend this kind of universal currency to upgrade them. But then if you really want to upgrade them, you've got a much rarer currency that you get from doing like kind of little platform challenges in the environment. There's a lot of systems and, you know, prices and things layered on top of each other here, but I think it does just about hang together. It's just, you know, it not necessarily is like the most friendly up front, I wouldn't say. And that would be actually, I think, one of the other things that kind of took me by a little bit by surprise, is just how kind of involved these kind of platform challenges are. I mean, some of this is like Celeste type stuff, when, you know, this is not that's what Celeste is. That's the whole game. It's you know, those platform challenges. Whereas this, like, it gets into that sort of territory a lot of the time, more so for like optional stuff, you know, rather than like absolute critical path. But still, it's there, and it's just kind of interesting. Like, you know, sometimes you can get some things, again, more on the optional side with Metroid. You might have to, you know, some very fancy, you know, shine sparking, you know, to go and get a missile tank that is not terribly useful. But, you know, like, in this case, you know, some of this stuff is like, I mean, how old? Celeste is like 6 years old, right? So I think if I played Celeste now, I think I would find it hard, because I think I am materially worse at video games than I was 6 years ago, sadly. And also this isn't like the bread and butter of this game. So, you know, there's that element to it as well. But yeah, sometimes it's a little bit tricky, with the platforming stuff. And there's just, you have so many capabilities. There are so many, and Metroid Dread ran into this as well. Like, Metroid Dread used like pretty much every button, right? Didn't it? You know, like on the Switch controller interface. Yeah. And you have, you know, a similar thing going on here, which is a far cry from like, you know, Zero Mission working fine with what GBA had to offer. But, you know, you are more capable. You have a bunch of stuff. I think the biggest like bit where it's like, okay, this is a bit overstretched here, is there's a kind of ability, or a lot of the abilities feed into some notion about temporal distortions, right, to do with the plot. You're in this kind of, you know, environment where time is scrambled, right? So a lot of your abilities revolve around that. And one of them is like almost, okay, you are flipping to some kind of alternate timeline, alternate universe. And what that means basically in this context is just, oh, well, you know, like you could switch platforms on and off, essentially. And then, you know, you've got to kind of switch among them with precise timing when, you know, you've got to make a particular kind of jump, while avoiding hazards and, you know, so on and so forth. Now, the problem with it is that I think by default anyway, it's mapped to clicking the right analog stick in, which should not be used for anything that requires timing, in my opinion. That's just not a good input for that. It's too mushy, you know what I mean? Like, for me anyway, if I'm trying to, you know, click the stick in, like, it just, with precise timing, it just doesn't feel right. It just, you know, you're like, have I quite got it yet? And then by the time you have, it's too late. So not a great choice, but I do have the option of playing, you know, with reprogrammable back shoulder buttons, like the extra ones. So I put it on there, and that works fine. But still, like, yeah, I think it just goes to show that they're kind of running out of options for some of this stuff, that you get into the point that you're putting those sorts of functions on, you know, the clickable sticks. But still, you know, it's impressive to me, you know, the number of areas in which the game kind of seems to work quite well. I mean, you've got elements here that are, with the combat, that are almost reminiscent of, you know, fighting games in terms of building up, like, super moves with the super gauge and different levels of the gauge that release different sort of super attacks and stuff, like that all kind of works relatively well. You've got some very kind of epic boss battles and stuff that, you know, can at first seem kind of overwhelming because you've got these like huge attacks and stuff, but the move set that you've got, the capabilities you have is so kind of, especially as it goes on, is so kind of significant that actually, no, you can get out of this. I mean, one of the powers that, you know, really gets sort of more useful the more you think about it is essentially like a rewind one. So like if you are in a certain spot in the environment and you press the front left shoulder button, that sort of creates a little crystal kind of outline of you that at any point then you can rewind to go back to that spot. Now, obviously they leverage that a great deal with puzzles in terms of, you know, kind of finding extra stuff, you know, treasure chests that might have health expansions, more currency, all that kind of thing. But then also you can apply it very liberally during the boss fights, you know, where you've got these attack patterns and it's just like, well, you know that you pretty much can't like dodge this conventionally. But if you know, create that sort of clone at the correct spot so that once the attack sweeps across, you just sort of teleport back to it. And then you're on the other side of that attack now. It's, you know, these things are really quite well implemented, you know, and they don't put too many restrictions on it. You could, you know, if you can come up with a kind of cool way to use it, it's going to work. So lots and lots to like. But I did run into, an aforementioned problem, which was a kind of, again, related to all this stuff about the kind of convoluted, like, buffs and skills kind of system with these amulets. So kind of what it leads you to do is kind of different loadouts for different circumstances. So for instance, you know, when you're just mostly exploring the map, and I have to say it's got to be the best map for this kind of game. It was the most transparent map, shall we say, I've ever seen, in terms of it's got very clear markings for like, okay, if these two areas are connected, but only in one, where it's like a one-way gate. You can only come through this way. It will mark that for you, you know, and everything is like really clear, really transparent, and you can mark it yourself with certain things. And on top of that, you can, actually like essentially take a screenshot of an area and then have the game take that screenshot and embed it in the map as a sort of point of interest. So not only will it remind you of like, oh, I should go back there, it'll remind you that, yes, I couldn't go there because there was like a particular kind of obstacle that was impassable. And then that will mean that when you get a new power, you're like, oh, I bet it'll work for that. And it'll remind you, you know, to check that specific point out rather than, you know, however many others you might have identified as places that you couldn't go before. So it's kind of a really nice way of streamlining that kind of process into the game, to the point that those like markers that are screenshot based are themselves something that you can expand. You can get more. There's like a finite resource that you get more of, like initial expansions, which I think is really kind of an interesting pickup to have. But it works, and it's a cool thing to have. But yes, I was kind of going around with my exploration kind of buffs going. You know, like things that draw in collectibles more easily and so forth. And then I kind of just went bit thoughtlessly into triggering, what was quite obviously going to be a boss fight. And then it's like, okay, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Kind of had a few goes against the boss again. I'll put this down for now. Come back later, get my, combat gear on, and we'll give it a go. And so I did come back later and do that. And then for whatever reason, it would not trigger that boss fight anymore. It would just hard crash out of the software entirely. And it repeated this several times. And I was beginning to think, good God, like, am I just going to be waiting on a patch? Because it had already been updated, obviously I didn't have it at launch. I imagine it was updated a few times in that sort of window. But even since I've had it, it's been updated a couple of times. But still, I imagine, more to come. But yeah, so I was worried. But I just started right before we recorded. I was like, let's just try some random stuff, like just like unequip this, re-equip something else, do some other random task, like just keep trying different things before I tried to trigger the boss fight. And it was crash. And then just before we started recording, it triggered it. So yeah, later on I will see if my combat gear can actually prevail over that boss. It seems like I'm pretty near the end, at least, of the kind of main quest. It does explicitly identify it in those terms, like an RPG would. You have main quests, you have side quests, and all that. So that's kind of a little bit different from a lot of of games in this genre. But I feel like I'm pretty near the end. It's on the save file. It says 60%, which I'm not sure what that represents. Is that, how much of the map I've covered, how many of the collectibles I have, some sort of composite thereof? I'm not sure. But it does feel like I must be not too terribly far away from the very end. And like I say, it's been, at times the map is like intimidatingly sprawling, actually. But, you've got a pretty comprehensive system of warps and saves, and the character is, and of course becomes even more so capable that I wouldn't say it's like too large and sprawling. It's not out of proportion, I wouldn't say, but equally I'm probably a little bit more, my tastes are a little bit more aligned with the more compact sort of style of something like a Zero Mission. But still, it's I've had a lot of fun with this, and I'm sure I'll come back. Hopefully, if there's no further such crash scenarios, I'll be able to finish it off and kind of give a final assessment next time. But there's a great deal to like in this.
Cool. Yeah, I might have to, at this point, I think I'm just going to wait him out because it's an Ubisoft game, but.
Oh, goodness knows how low this will go eventually.
Yeah, I'm not going to ride this all the way to the bottom. Yeah, but like it's, I feel bad saying it, but I can never recommend buying an Ubisoft game at full price.
Yeah, it's tough. It's the same thing with just like Warner's games.
Yeah, like this game could be an 11 out of 10. I'd be like, wait.
Yep.
Wait a week. Like wait, it might literally just be a week.
Yeah.
You never know. So,
I think that Ubisoft should just get used to you not owning their games.
Oh, that's going to be such an adjustment for them. I don't know how they're going to survive.
Certainly, I should have got used to people not paying full price for them by now.
Oh my God. I just price your game lower. I don't know. Do something.
They're quadruple A, James, so what are you going to say?
They're quadruple A.
It comes with the price.
Never mind. All right. Well, on that, we have a quadruple A podcast, and so we need a quadruple A break so that we can come back and do. Honestly, I've seen what y'all sent us. At best, this is single A email. So stay tuned. Emails. They're a method of communication that was developed to allow people to send messages across the internet so that you could send information in real time without having to rely on things like actual mail or talking to humans, because that's the worst thing imaginable.
I get them on the internet superhighway, James.
That's good for you, John. I'm very proud. I get them in Outlook.
The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines email as
email. I honestly, I would love to hear how a traditional dictionary, like the first time, described email. Like how much information they felt like they needed to give you. I'm going to guess it started with electronic mail or email. Yeah, that's what email is. It's a thing where you get messages from your coworkers that make you feel bad. So you make us feel good by sending us email to rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. You're probably asking yourself, what kind of email should I send? Well, let me lay out a story for you. Lay out a plan. So you got a question about video games. Like there was the I would just call it overblown Microsoft announcements this week where everybody was like, they're going to go third party or they're going to be cloud only. Every screen is an Xbox, and it's like, what about my screen window? Is that an Xbox? No. They announced 4 games. 4 games. They didn't even announce the games. There are 4 games.
And pretty much everybody guessed them to begin with. Yes,
almost immediately. So there are 4 games that are coming to a couple platforms. But no, they're talked about the next new hardware coming this year, not new systems like controller hardware, and that they're working on the biggest technical leap in console history for some reason. For no reason. We're going down this road. We're going down the like we've got the biggest engine lane again, so that's cool. We got an email asking.
It's kind of funny because
Sony.
I was looking at Mastodon. Like I follow this account that just shows old advertisements, and there was at least one where the N64 was claimed to be the most powerful graphical, machine ever.
The N64, they were rotten for it during that. That's all they traded off. These magazine ads where it's like, you can't buy this. When things
you
like
literally can buy this. That's the whole purpose of the ad.
Because it was it's stuff like Computer Video Games magazine, which was a multi-format magazine. Obviously they would have, at this point, say it's 95, right? Lots of coverage of PlayStation games and Saturn games and all that, and so Nintendo's buying ad space to say you can't buy an N64 yet, but don't buy the rest of the shit that's in this magazine because N64 is going to be so ridiculously technically superior that you must wait and save your monies for a bit extra time as well if you were in the UK and you weren't importing, because it wasn't until I think March of 97 that it eventually came out. But still, so you very much couldn't buy it for quite a while. But
this is the future. Unless you're in Japan, they've already had it for 11 months. But this is the future for you. Techno supremacy aside, ultimately an overblown thing. Also, the direct that was definitely happening this week, that definitely happened. Y'all remember that definitely happened? It didn't happen. And there was a period, I was watching some like online communication around this. I thought it was very funny, where people were like, Nintendo tweeted a bunch of like trailers and stuff, and they're like, this is the setup. It's like, why would them tweeting a bunch of trailers be the setup for a format where they just play a bunch of trailers? Doesn't fucking make any sense. Doesn't fucking make any sense. Are you on meth, sir? That doesn't make sense. And then they all went along with like, oh, that's it. They're clearing the deck. I'm like, that's what directs are. Directs are clearing the deck. Are you insane?
Clearing the deck for trailers. Okay.
With trailers, yeah.
We're being primed right now. I can feel it.
The best part of this was, as I'm reading through this, losing my mind at these things, someone quoted me without saying my name. They said the outlet. About my rant where I'm like, if somebody tells you that they know there's a direct coming in the middle of February, they're a fucking charlatan. And I was like, God damn it. I was like, that's me. That's me having that rant right there, unnamed.
You don't need a direct when you can just casually drop like the fact that you've got like Persona Peach in Peach Showtime. What do you need a bunch of trailers for when you've got that?
What if you had a trailer for every Oh, they've basically been doing that.
It's like 4 at a time or whatever. Yeah.
But if you want to ask us about why there wasn't a direct last week, this is, by the way, me saying this right now. Like, this conversation is going to cause a direct to get announced between me saying it and the episode coming out. Like, we're trending in a dangerous space because Nintendo did another round of spirits that we didn't even know about. Somebody told me on Saturday. And it was exactly the thing that we said the next set of spirits would be if Nintendo was listening.
Pokemon's pretty bad. I mean, I was thinking about Mary Wonder, but yeah, it's like Pokemon, kind of a big deal. So yeah, and lots of representation in Smash. But yeah, there's the two legendaries that they represented with Ridley and Charizard. Like,
yes.
Yeah, that was they had a bit of teeth to it. That was the hardest one so far.
That was a tough one, yeah. I was losing it because that was the exact one where we said, "Hey Nintendo, if you're listening, do this one next." It's like, oh god, they are. But now we're back at a weird number, and my number brain hates it. And I'm like, no, why did you put us back at a weird number?
So it seems like the faucet is open again, and
every other week.
We could be ready to get more like, instead of just like backtracking with games that they kind of missed, while they weren't doing spirits, we could get things from stuff coming out again, maybe, like your Unicorn Overlord or
I hope
Princess Peach, whatever else.
I hope the last spirit we get is a spirit representing the next Smash game. Like, it's out, and they just, like, drop one more spirit. It's like, one more, here it is. It's the opening sequence from the current game. Have fun. Just like a nice round ending to that. But right now, they're back at an odd number. So
how on earth they're going to represent Horace for that spirit when it inevitably does show up is going to be quite interesting.
What if we got 5 Horus spirits?
New Mii costume, actually new DLC, they sort of break the seal on that again, just so that you get the Mii costume with the horse head on.
Yeah, there's the head, and there's also the purple sequined suit.
With honestly, the carrot in the breast, so the lapel.
Oh, yeah. So, they'll do multiple spirits of the same character. What if they just did 5 Horus spirits that are the different images from him on that cursed website? They're all just called Horus. There's no explanation. It just says Horus, 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 Horus.
Silly sailor.
There we go. Now I want this. How would they make Horus fights? Oh, there's opportunity here.
Maybe it's like there's one Mii that's that got the Horus DLC Mii costume horse head on, but then you fight like it's 100-man melee.
Oh, yeah, got it.
You fight 100, just random Miis.
Shit, he's on there. That's how they're gonna launch the. I can't remember what I fucking called that Warriors game. 1-2 Warriors. Oh my god. Anyway, emails. You could send us all that kind of bullshit, I guess. That'd be a weird email to write. I don't know. We kind of already did it, but that gives you an idea. Like you can play with the form. You can just give us a prompt to launch off. You can ask us a question that we may or may not answer. We may try to answer it. We may say something else entirely. We may give you a history lesson on the MSX or huge wastes of money. Who can say? But these emails are emails you sent to us, and we're going to read them now, and then we're going to try to answer them. So with enough stalling out of the way, I will read the first email because it's long, and I edited it down already. So it was longer. Joe writes, "Dear RFN, like everyone else, I have played a lot of Tears of the Kingdom, and while there's a lot of fun to be had with some real standout moments, I haven't found the experience to be a cohesive whole thematically. I don't feel that the Zonai fit into the world as well as other races, and the presence of certain technology in the game often felt jarring. The vehicle stuff feels un-Zelda in tone and leaves me cold. I felt the sensation again whilst playing Super Mario Bros. Wonder as well. It feels like a lot of disparate ideas are thrown together rather than a group of elements contained within a world operating under the same internal logic. To a certain degree, I also felt this way playing Super Mario Odyssey. After trying to get into Wonder, I've been wondering, why I feel these games are incoherent messes of disjointed ideas. The first possibility is the old culprit nostalgia. Are the other titles definitive, or is it that I simply grew up with them more cohesive? Am I just accustomed to their zany ideas? For me, Super Mario Bros. 3 is an adventure with the Mushroom Kingdom that feels perfectly self-contained, but today, would I view the Koopa Kids as grotesque and tanks bizarrely out of place? Maybe. The second possibility is the franchises have been around for such a long time and have long since provided the most authentic experiences, and Nintendo are now running out of ideas, or at least ideas that remain within the internal logic of these worlds. And lastly, could it just be these franchises are progressing and changing our ideas of what the themes these games actually are. Maybe I need to just accept that the definitive has been done and can't be done again. So, would these modern games lack thematic cohesion, or have I just gone full Cranky Kong? Kind regards.
I don't know. Probably a little bit of both. I mean, you see this though with
Breath.
I just always think of Dragon Quest. And what was it? Dragon Quest, was it Dragon Quest 9? Whatever one where the fan base rioted when they tried to make changes to it.
So, well, there were two riots. But there was the one where they tried to make it a mobile game, and the fan base rightly rioted. Because it was not, I mean, it just wasn't a Dragon Quest game. They just took a license and applied shit to it. But then there was, Dragon's, what was it called? Dragon's Quarter? I'm trying to remember what the PS2,
that's a Breath of Fire game.
You're thinking of Breath of Fire, yeah. Dragon Quest 9 is the DS game.
Dragon Quest 9.
God damn it, you're right.
Yeah, was originally meant to be maybe like real-time combat and multiplayer, right?
Yeah, you're right. And then it ends up being like this kind of weird thing on it. It's still different.
Yeah.
Because you can create your own character and people can join you, so it is in a way multiplayer, but they walked back a lot of the changes that they wanted to make initially.
Yeah, my point being that there's some of these franchises are around for so long that people get stuck with something that is a Dragon Quest game, or this is a Mario game and this isn't. So any changes made to the formula, because people like the formula, they've been playing the formula for sometimes decades, so any changes to it sometimes ring hollow. Even if they are superficial, like with Super Mario Bros. Wonder, it's, some weird stuff thrown in there. I mean, I'm not super attached to Mario after Mario after Mario. So I really
says having played 2 Marios in the last week.
Right, but I feel like there's like a hardcore Mario audience who will play the living hell out of every single Mario game. I'm not that guy. I like Mario games, but I'm not going to sit there and slavishly, play every single Mario game that comes out. But to me, I just felt that the changes made to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, it was kind of cool because they were doing something a little bit different, and it wasn't just, new Super Mario Brothers all over again.
I mean, fundamentally... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I mean, it sometimes, I mean, you can play a series a lot and enjoy it, but not necessarily be emotionally invested in it in the same way. You know what I mean? Like, there's different series I might have played equally as much, in terms of the games, but would if one of them changing affect me more than the other, perhaps? I think the Dragon Quest example just kind of suggests that, I think that kind of reaction, and probably with Pokemon as well, is more sort of emotional than you'd get from Mario players. I think there's like a greater level of kind of emotional attachment to the way those games works among those fan bases than, something that is a little bit more loosely defined than Mario, because as a character, he's in loads of different types of games. Not just the platformers, but then with the platformers, it's like, well, there's the side scrollers, there's the 3D games, and the 3D games have been quite a lot different. So over time, it's become more of a loose thing. And I don't know that there is such a kind of rigid set of expectations, but I mean, at the heart of this, you've got the No Country for Old Men thing. Right. It's basically, like when you're young, if something happens that's outside of your sort of, sphere of expectation, you have to sort of say, oh, well, I didn't think that was like possible or within the bounds of like predictability or acceptability, but I guess it must be. And then you move on. When you're old, it's like, no. I know the way things that are how they're meant to be, and this is outside of it. This is bullshit, and then you don't accept it. Like that. That's what happens to you when you get old. It's just like if something confounds your expectations, you are much less likely to just accept that your expectations are not perfect and just move on with it.
It's also a strange paradox because you're also like, nothing defies my expectations. This is bullshit. I've seen it all.
I mean, you've got
everything's
more information
the same now.
Too. So, like, you've built up a much more firmly oriented matrix of what is normal and expected. And so when you're putting together what is reality with 3 points of data, you're much more amenable to like 0.4 being way outside the bounds. Whereas if you've got 100 points of data and a 0.101 is way the fuck over there, you're going to be like, well, that's an outlier. That's weird. Why is that over there? That needs to be over here. What are you doing?
I mean, I just think it's interesting. I mean, if you think that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't feel like if you think the vehicle aspect of Tears of the Kingdom doesn't feel like a Zelda game, then what would you say about Zelda 2 Adventure of Link?
So what I would say is Tears of the Kingdom, and I agree with this to a certain degree. I think he's more thinking about like the world that they've constructed. So like the sudden litter of technology shit everywhere, like they do explain it to some degree, but the amount of which has fallen recently, like they would have been cognizant of its existence. Like some of it would have made it to ground before then. Yeah. But like pressingly, I just think as a side note to that, I think this is probably why I don't like certain Final Fantasy games, because it feels like they're cramming technology into something where that's not Final Fantasy to me. But see, I think I'm fine with a Final Fantasy game that has technology as a core component, as long as it fit in that world. I think the problem was we had spent a lot of time with that world in Breath of the Wild.
Yeah,
we had been told explicitly that like the most technologically sophisticated were the Sheikah, who we'd lost all their technology. And that had been dug up from like 50,000 years ago, like some crazy ass long time ago. And then we're like, actually, go back even further. There's these camelids, these hominid camelids that had even crazier technology. And now it's just everywhere. It's just fucking everywhere. And it doesn't feel like that the Zonai really fit into that world. I'm sure there's some lore people who are like, they fit perfect. They don't. You're wrong. Sorry. They just don't.
But it's just the inevitable. I mean, could they have done it better? Yeah, they could have come up with better explanations. No. They could have done some things but as we know, they don't care that much.
They don't. They're like, you know what would be fun if we could just build vehicles with these new powers that we're giving players, and let's find a story that just fits that. But yes, it could have been done better for sure.
Yeah, but like the Zonai didn't need to be fucking camels, and we didn't need to have established a backstory
on the camel thing.
Well, because her ancestor fucked the camel, Greg.
I'll be very, very aerated about this. Clearly, this is very much outside of your sphere of expectation.
It's just a weird little dude that's meant to look like that.
He's not little. He's huge. He's huge. He's like 8 feet tall.
Yeah. Whatever. James was very affected by the Joe the Camel cigarette ads as a child.
Yeah, you're right.
Greg.
You're right. No, but like. No, but it's just
very disturbed by.
All right, first off, fuck.
I mean, the point is, I was going to say is that we know, they probably could have done a better job of like integrating it from a narrative point of view. That it might have felt a bit more natural, but that kind of runs against their general like order of priorities. But some of it is just the inevitable consequence of imposing these new gameplay systems on a world that we already came to know in such detail, as James already said. You spent this much time there, and a lot of the, I think, some of the joy of Tears of the Kingdom is it's seeing that familiar world, but in a new context, and being able to navigate it in new ways, and all this. So I don't think it's unsuccessful, but it does feel like out of place. It just does. Like that's just I think a function of this idea of if you built a Zelda game entirely from scratch with these concepts, and whether it would technically be Hyrule or just some other place, like it wouldn't feel as out of place because you would never have known the world before that shit got superimposed onto it.
Yeah, and it did feel inelegant in some ways. Like, isn't it weird that this glider coincidentally fell down right where there's a ramp on the lower ground? Like it felt very human placed is probably the thing. And I actually feel like Breath of the Wild, one of its key achievements is the world does feel cohesive. It feels cohesive with the story because it is using the world to tell the story. Whereas it felt like this,
Definitely, yeah.
a lot of times it was just like, well, this is a high thing, so we're going to put a ledge here. There it is. Have fun with that ledge. Here's the, isn't it weird that we dropped a fan and a plane and a battery and a control stick all at the same spot? And so it did feel less elegant.
At
so
the same time, I wish they had dropped them at more places. To be honest.
Why? Because I had thousands of them in my inventory.
It depends. Does it eventually you get to this point, where you become so powerful, with like auto builds and you've got so much resources and stuff that it's just like, yeah, who gives a shit what they put anywhere? But in the early and because it is again, it's so non-linear, right? You could strike out anywhere, so who knows where you're going to explore first? But you don't have all that stuff, and therefore they do need to consider we need to throw them a few bones here, so you end up having to throw a few bones everywhere. So again, it's the non-linear structure that adds to it as well. If you had a scripted kind of linear progression through this world, even with the kind of weirdness of you already were familiar with it and now we've dumped this stuff on top of it, even then you could, by having a linear path, you could pace it out and kind of, kind of ease some of that, mismatch that's going on. But they don't have that to fall back on either. So I'm glad they made the choices they did, because in the end, it's just more useful. It's more like fun to play with. It's a very playful spirit that they've got, but it does come with some downsides.
Yeah. Like it ended up feeling in places like you talked about last week with, it was originally we're talking about from the context of rare games, but it came through Ukulele of just like, sometimes you'd look at an area and it just felt like it was full of fucking litter. Like it was just everything's been thrown on the ground here because there's a million things to pick up. And that didn't happen as bad, but there are definitely spots where you walked in and it's like, boy, there's a boat and another boat and a bunch of other stuff. Isn't that weird? Isn't that wild? But I think from the like the world building standpoint for that one, like you could say whatever, James is obsessed with the camel thing, but there's literally only 2 of them of that entire race, and he has the temerity to call himself a king. It's like there's just you and your sister left, man. You're not a king. Like fuck off with that bullshit. So it really felt like we don't want to have to create, an entire society of these characters. So let's just make 2 and say all the rest are dead. It's like, wait, what? Because again, there was nowhere to put them besides in the sky, which is a fairly limited resource from a space standpoint. So it's just like, well, there's 2 of them, and one of them is in a big dumb mech suit. It's like, oh, okay, I guess, sure, why not? Where'd the rest of their race go? Who cares? It's fine. And so it did feel like they cared less about that part of world building than the predecessor game did. So I can see why that one would stick out more. And we talked about it with the story too, where they basically just said like, yeah, the story of the other game, I don't know, fuck it. It's like, we're not worried about the details. They did eventually say where the Sheikah stuff went when somebody asked, and they're like, it disappeared. And it's like, no.
Right. Well, there's like, they had this feeling of Breath of the Wild that you were kind of, like doing archaeology, like basically figuring out what the history of this place was. And I kind of feel like they wanted to do that again, but they needed to, kind of shake the magic. What's that toy called? Anyway, like they needed to reset everything, to erase the history and replace it with a different history.
This other history, yeah.
Yeah, look, you can find out what happened here all over again. And forget about what you discovered last time. This is new. Like it's clumsy, but yeah, like I feel like that's what they were trying to reproduce.
But in the end, like it wasn't as integrated into the world as the story of Breath of the Wild was. Like you looked around Breath of the Wild and shit from that war was everywhere. Yeah. In this game, all that stuff happened up in the sky. So like you looked around the world and at best you saw pieces of the sky that had crashed into the ground. But it felt disconnected in a way that Breath of the Wild didn't.
The Mario Wonder is interesting because I also felt like there was a lot of kind of disparate ideas thrown together, but I feel like that's been Mario for a long, long time. Like 2D Mario for a long time. Like Joe writes about Mario 3, but just think about Mario World, which a lot of people feel like it's a little bit too close to Super Mario 3, like it's just a continuation of that. But I feel like a lot of the wonder effects in Super Mario Wonder are kind of like have their a one-to-one in a lot of cases with stuff that happens in Mario World, like when you're walking on the background in Wonder, that just reminds me, the chain link fences, like it's basically, the same gameplay a little bit, or the power balloon in Super Mario World that
definitely.
Makes you float, like that. There's a lot of that in Super Mario Wonder. So Brothers Wonder. Sorry, Brunder.
Yeah, yes. We must remember Brothers Wonder. Yeah,
indeed. And so, yeah, like I feel like maybe it just depends on how you feel about the era that those games came out in. Like if you were a certain age, you'd like maybe 3 or World were one of your first Mario games. Like it might resonate more, and then you see something like Wonder, and it feels. It's almost weird to some people perceive it as like, oh, it's disparate and weird and it's not definitive like Mario World was, when in my mind, like in some ways, Wonder was not different enough. Like it was not, like it was a new coat of paint, but a lot of old ideas.
And it was still, not that far off the new Super Mario Brothers games. There was a lot, and I really like those games, so I'm not like, crying or anything about that fact fundamentally, but, quite a lot of it was kind of flash and, and style, which, those games lacked.
Those games, that's what I was going to say. It needed it.
It needed it, and it's been long enough that also, like, I'm more sort of sanguine, or more than sanguine, about having fundamentally more of that than I would have been back in 2015, because in 2015 it's like, okay, yeah, we've had a lot of this in 10 years, whereas now it cooled off a bit, so yeah, in some ways it didn't have to be as drastically different to feel kind of welcome. But yeah, I mean, Mario's always been, as I said, as a character, he's the everyman. He's in all sorts of stuff. And then even games that we would consider mainline, they have, lots of, they cast a wide net. They go in lots of different directions. People certainly said of, quite a few of the same things about, the Galaxy games as they do about both Super Mario Bros. 3 in the past, and then, going all the way up to Super Mario Bros. Wonder now, of just, they'll introduce some idea that they probably could have like had a bunch of different challenges, and they do it once or twice, and then they leave it. That was very much something said about Galaxy and Galaxy 2. And those are 3D games, but they have quite, more of a linear influence, than, for instance, 64 and Sunshine. So, that kind of shows through there. So in some ways it's, it's part of the tradition to be something that isn't strictly defined. So that's the thing. I mean, your Dragon Quest and your Pokemons, they did have a pretty rigid formula that they stuck to, which only sets you up more for people, being willing to revolt when there's any change. Of course, John already alluded to it. If you were going through this stuff through the 8-bit era, games change genres, like from one to the next, so it's like Castlevania, right? It was Castlevania's one thing, and then Simon's Quest is something completely different, and then Castlevania 3 we go back, and Zelda was the same, it's like, okay, well, Zelda 2 is like a totally other genre, and then Zelda 3, well, they've gone back, like, I don't think you were that wedded to, like, you've kind of felt like games could be a lot of different stuff, but then, of course you had games adapting into 3D, which was a whole saga where, things sometimes became radically different, or they just didn't do it successfully at all, so like, you had that whole thing. So yeah, I mean, for a lot of series, they didn't have this kind of settled thing until later. And certainly, you could look at Zelda was quite a few things for quite a while. And then at some point, like the Ocarina of Time really kind of crystallized it into that for a long time, didn't it? Which itself owed a great deal to Link to the Past, it must be said. But yeah, and then it became kind of more of a formula, which eventually, they kind of broke free of with Breath of the Wild, and most people seem to be, ready for that at that point. But I'm sure, there's plenty that still, do like the way the old games were and wouldn't mind something that kind of, could harken back to it at some point.
Yeah, and Nintendo themselves will sometimes do their little runs back into what previous games were like. I mean, they themselves called Breath of the Wild kind of a return to the openness of the first Zelda game. Now that's a little bit true and a little bit just nice to say, but they'll do these referential pieces where they take back the theming to something very very retro, or they'll rediscover elements of theming. I mean, Mario Odyssey, for its lack of coherence, which is a deliberate decision in that game. Like
it's the aesthetic. It really kind of plays it up, isn't it? That there isn't like one aesthetic. It's like the different kingdoms each have their own one, really, to some extent. So, like, yeah, they're not trying to hide it. It's not like, oh, whoops, we kind of made it incoherent. It's like that is the style to a fair degree.
But even there's moments like in New Donk City where it's really hearkening back to some much older stuff, some like Wrecking Crew and Donkey Kong stuff, where they're trying to bring that theming back in and sort of refresh it for the purposes of this particular game.
And also in terms of, again, Guillaume already kind of mentioned that, what their priorities are. I think generally it is always like, oh, well, if we got a fun idea, well, let's just do it. If it's awkward, if it's a little bit awkward thematically, or, if you could question how well it fits, like, we won't worry too much about how we justify this in the plot or the world or whatever. We'll just do it. And I think, especially with Mario, that's like, I would not have it otherwise. Because, I mean, what's the most thematically cohesive Mario game? It's Super Mario Sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, like, beyond the mechanical stuff of Sunshine that's frustrating and annoying, that game sometimes feels a little boring, like, in terms of theming, because one area often looks a lot like another. Look, we're on the beach again. And so, yeah, I think Odyssey's play with concepts is very fun. I don't quite see it with 3D World. Like, 3D World feels fairly coherent to me. Like, it feels like there's a ramp up as he gets deeper and deeper into Bowser's plans, but it mostly just feels like any other Mario game since World, where they really tried to theme the stages, where you'd have like ice stages and you'd have desert areas and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's a little bit of that in 3, but in World they obviously had a much fresher palette they could use. It actually, like, 3D Land and 3D World really actually feel like a step back to those eras of stuff. Although 3D Land, of course, they said they were targeting Super Mario 3, which there is definitely Super Mario 3 content in it, obviously. But, like, it still feels like they really were aiming at World and just mentioned 3 because it also had 3 in the name.
It's true, but yeah, obviously when you get to 3D World, it really kind of with the world map, it's more like Super Mario World at that point. And there's more thematic variety in 3D World because it was the second game. It was iterative. It was on more powerful hardware, and they, therefore had just more experience making that kind of game, so they could do more weirder stuff like the casino world or whatever. Like it just wasn't as the 3D, as we've said many times, 3D Land, it had to get done. So some of that kind of flourish was put on the back burner for just getting the fundamentals right and getting it on the shelves as soon as it needed to be.
Yeah. But I don't know, like, I'm trying to think of a game where thematic inconsistency really bothered me. Like, I definitely think...
But, I mean, as a general matter, you'd think it'd be something where the narrative is more important than Mario. That's the thing. When it's like, okay, I need to be immersed in this world to kind of engage with it more so than a game that's just like a bunch of fun challenges and whimsical and frivolous.
Yeah. So Xenoblade 3 is an interesting one. Because two, for all its weirdness, is relatively consistent.
You have the character design thing where it's like, oh well, we've got guest character designers from everywhere,
and can be.
That's not thematic. So much thematic because it's just pure design, aesthetic kind of inconsistency. But it's kind of it's siloed because it's the blades. Mostly. I mean, right. you do have a Torna as well who have their own look. So there is that element to it. But yeah, it's mostly just the blades can look like anything basically, can't they? Because they hail from different even other games in some cases.
Right. But 3 has a weird sense of, even though the colonies are all part of this relatively rigid military structure, largely speaking, they operate fairly differently. And in most of the cases, it's fine, with one notable exception. And Greg, I suspect you can guess which one this is.
I'm trying to think. I mean, they're all kind of, their own different, sort of slightly different in some cases, spin on, well, how do they navigate the war? And some of them are, kind of quite different, aren't they? Like, there's one where they're just trying to be friends, isn't it? Like,
that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah. Whereas I've referred to them as the Lisa Frank calendar of Xenoblade colonies.
You know what it reminds me of? If you remember Battle Royale, the Japanese film with, yes. Beat Takeshi in it. There's like a group of I think it's pretty much exclusively girls, like holed up somewhere, and they're all just trying to get along, and it's like, looks like it's going to work almost, that they're actually, hey, we're cooperating, we're surviving, we're not killing each other, we're not doing what we're supposed to do, we're going to get through this. But of course, in Battle Royale, they've got like ringers. They've got like the guy that's like end of Scarface Tony Montana, and the psycho girl. I can't remember which one of them just completely fucks up that place. Everyone dies horribly. But I was thinking, is this where they're going with this?
No, because the entire Cadencia region is just fuck-ups. Because you have Colony Mu on one side, which is the weird, like, let's be friends together, where there's literally a quest about them trying to find stickers. And you have Colony 15 on the other side, which is in the middle of their weird pirate fantasy. And, like, that's it. That's all that's happening in the Cadencia region, is just this dumb shit. And it's happening on both sides of the ocean, or the sea, because I think it's the Aerith Sea. And they're both just, like, off doing nonsense. And it's like, what? I just came from... Because I think you actually come here right after... Is it right after the execution? I think it depends on when you arrived there. I think I got there early. And it's like, oh, what? I don't understand this at all. And then you find the Lost Colony in that area where everything's gone super no good, very bad. But again, I think they did it in that case where it feels jarring. I think that was deliberate. They wanted it to feel jarring, and it kind of makes everything else more upsetting because it reminds you that, no, these really are children. Like, they really did just have a scavenger hunt over who gets a sticker because they're children, because they're fucking children. This is how they're supposed to behave. And you end up with, like, once you get out of Cadencia again, they're trying to kill each other. It's like, oh yeah, that's it. You've got one group pretending to be pirates and stealing their Foranus so they can go be pirates on the sea. And their console's response is, oh, well, boys will be boys, huh? It's like, what? No, no, that's not the right response. Yeah, like that's the one place where that kind of disconnect actually, I felt like it added to the game. Like, it was like, oh, okay. it's a reminder that no, everything else is messed up. These two colonies, for all their stupidity, and they're both very stupid. Those are two extremely dumb colonies. Get it. Like, they're actually right, in spite of their complete moronic behavior, almost self-destructive degree of moronicism. And yeah, like it worked there. I think that's a tricky line to walk, though. And the Xenoblade team
and I would say
again,
the tricky line there, I think, is on the one hand, like, it is a game that I think is going to want more buy-in from the player, to the narrative. I mean, I think there's plenty of ways you can enjoy something like Xenoblade 3, even if you weren't that bought into the narrative, because there's a lot of, the world, the mechanics, like the exploration. There's still, I don't think you have to be 100% in love with the narrative to still get a lot out of the game. But broadly speaking, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for buy-in. But at the same time, if it was entirely one note, for the length of time that it takes to get to, certainly you can spend even more, but just if you were trying to get to the credits on a Xenoblade, that would be its own problem. It'd be cohesive to a fault. It'd be just a bit repetitive and again, one note. So yeah, having, some kind of moments of levity or some just variety and just, like you said, almost kind of just recontextualizes all the other stuff you've seen. I feel like it didn't break immersion. No, it didn't, it was effective within, the parameters they set.
Tau is the same way. That's the one where they've basically just given up because they either don't believe they can or do not want to kill. And so they've basically just said, like, yeah, we're going to die. We're aware of that. Our clock's going to run out. That's the end. And we're just going to patiently wait here for that day to come. And even outside of Tau, their alleged, co-partisans are like, yeah, they're useless. We're just going to let them go. Whatever. We don't care. And it's kind of the same thing where that's jarring in the opposite direction of just like, oh, if you don't want to participate, well, you don't really have a choice. It's that or just accept that you're going to get killed. And it's like, oh, that's kind of upsetting in a different way. So yeah, it can work. It can be a useful tool. I think it just requires a defter hand than just saying we're going to build a world that really aims for cohesion and consistency, for it to not feel inelegant. And I think that's kind of what we settle on with Tears. It's like it feels inelegant and it feels like a weird fit in a lot of places. I don't know. Anybody else have anything? Or we want to move on? Let's move on. Go ahead.
Just a world that doesn't make any freaking sense and there's no cohesion. What about Button Kaitos?
I think it makes sense to some degree. Like the cohesion is that these islands exist sort of atomically, and they've sort of evolved in their own direction. But yeah, like the fact that everything's stored in cards is stupid. But
there's this world that's made out of a cake, and this one is Tower of Druaga. Have fun.
Yeah. I like the cake place. Everybody wears masks and speaks with weird voice echoers. Yeah, that is a weird universe. It is extremely odd.
But that's kind of for the sake of being weird.
Yeah, so, like it's meant to evoke storybooks, I think.
So the lack of cohesion is kind of the point. Right.
So we've hit Monolith a bunch. So obviously the most thematically cohesive game is Disaster Day of Crisis, which the theme is, oh Jesus, oh fuck, oh God. That is the theme of Disaster Day of Crisis, and it's cohesive the whole way down. There's not a single moment where that's not the only thought in your head. So just need more robots and earthquake machines and
bears,
bears, and driving into the camera as opposed to away from the camera. We need all that. That'll make a game feel cohesive. All right, John, would you read David's email?
Certainly.
This should be a good and short one for us.
David writes, "Hey, RFN crew. We've all had those days when we were under the weather or sick and had to miss school or work. I have a recent example with myself being absent from work due to a cold for 2 days. I used that time to complete the entirety of Another Code Recollection, an odd yet somber game to play while sick. What are some games you have played or completed while under the weather? Did your level of wellness affect your enjoyment of the game in any way? Thanks, and keep up the good work.
You want to go first, John?
I mean, games that I play usually when I'm sick are games that I don't have to think about. Or
okay.
Comfort food games, usually. Things where it's like I've played them a million times. Monster Hunter comes to mind, obviously. But also just stuff even as simple as like Tetris Connected, stuff like that. Just stuff where I just like turn my brain off and go.
So,
is there anything else you were looking for, James?
No,
or something you were expecting?
I was just legitimately curious.
Yeah.
You read the email, so I figured I'd cue you up first.
Or I just buy another copy of Skyrim.
Yeah, well, that's fair.
Yeah.
It makes you feel better. You can just rub the Skyrims on your body.
I have it on one more platform, so therefore it's just like protective talismans.
Did you get the Skyrim voice controlled for Alexa? I think it was. I mean, that's still out there for you to do.
That would be pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie.
No, I'm not. You should Google it.
I might check that out.
So I've got two. So I was I had a couple surgeries, 2020 and 2021. And it turns out that before the surgery to repair a hernia, I was playing Forza, and afterwards I played Forza, just not comfortably. But when I had a ligaments repaired in my elbow, all of them, it just sucks. Don't do that. I beforehand was playing Forza, and afterwards was playing Forza sideways because I couldn't turn my arm. So I was holding the controller to my side.
That's the last thing I would want to play. And anything like that requires precision or could be frustrating or...
Excuse me. Forza Horizon,
okay. Forza Motorsport, I'm like, my God, keep me far away from that game.
So the hernia
if I'm sick or on drugs in any way. Yeah.
The hernia was motorsport, but since I literally had to hold the controller to my side after having my elbow repaired, so I couldn't see the controller, like it was literally on the side of my body, because I was in a sling. That was not happening. So that was Horizon, but sick. So I caught a really nasty flu or flu-like virus a few years back. I think I peaked at 103 Fahrenheit, which is really right on the border of like you need to go to a hospital. So I spent a bunch of time in a cold bath just to get my temperature down, and I was hallucinating because of the fever, and so I played Hypnospace Outlaw, which is already a hallucinogenic experience of a game. I'm going to say that's not recommended. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, no, don't hallucinogenic state. Don't play a hallucinogenic game. It's a lot. It was a lot to take in emotionally. But like I was miserable sick. Like when you get that, like my fever's so bad, my body's shaking and I can't stop.
Yeah.
That was where I was for like 3 days.
That's not good. It's not good at all.
I was in bed for 3 days. Like I only got up to essentially get food. And at some point I just brought cereal upstairs. So I'm like, I don't want to go downstairs anymore. I just can't. And all I did was sleep and play Hypnospace Outlaw. This incredibly trippy, fucked up game about an internet that didn't exist in the 90s, where people are trying to sell you a hot butter ice cream with jingles. And it's like, I am just out of it, and this is the weirdest shit I've ever seen, and I can't handle it.
But what worked about that was the fact that I'm sure you just had bedhead or medhead like crazy, and you could just sit there and almost like trip through it.
Yeah, essentially, because like the whole purpose of the game, it's a mystery. So you're trying to piece together information from this like web ring. This is like AOL style internet, like back when America Online versus the internet. and like you're basically patrolling it for hints for what's going down, and like I could focus on it, but like my eyes would start to blur, and not because my eyes couldn't focus, but my brain couldn't process the info. And so like I just kind of pushed through, but it worked because it was so weird and so inane and so just stupid and goofy and ridiculous that like it was a distraction from just how fucking terrible I felt.
And also the type of game it was too, where I'm sure it probably wasn't.
Yeah, there's no time.
Fast-paced. Yeah, there's no time. Yeah, that's the whole thing. That's what I avoid, is any game like that puts any sort of demands on me.
It was just, I took a mouse to bed, which is a weird phrase to say. I took the mouse from my computer for my workspace, brought it into my bedroom so I had a mouse, and just put the laptop on the pillow next to me and laid there on the pillow I was in with the mouse on the bed, just clicking. Like, that was it, man. I was just on my side playing that game for like 3 to 4, and occasionally I'd just fall asleep in the middle of playing it. I'd wake up and it was on whatever bullshit I was looking at when I went to sleep. But it worked.
What finally broke your fever?
Time.
Wow.
Like I would get it down into like the high 90s.
Yeah.
Which is manageable. You know, like 99, 100. That's
you're still feeling
fine.
pretty crappy though. Like you're still feeling flushed.
Yeah. 104 fucking sucks. That's the worst.
Well, that's where you're sitting there, your teeth are chattering because your body is pretty much trying to cool yourself down.
Yeah, and so you're like literally at one point it was just like I'm going to stand in a cold shower for an hour just to not feel so fucking hot.
Yep.
And then it was back to Hypnospace Outlaw.
Yeah.
This is not good. Like I don't do drugs and play Hypnospace Outlaw. Don't do it with like hallucinogenic fevers. But play that game as clean a mind as you can. Do play it. It's very good. Guillaume?
Yeah, so I had one, then I remembered another example after your hallucinogenic, game experience. The first one was, at some point I broke my right arm. I had been working for not that long, and, but I tried to go to work with my arm in a cast, but like it was one of those big ass casts that went all around the hand. Like I couldn't really move my fingers. And so I went to work to the office, and, my work has a lot of typing, and people were just like, what the hell are you doing? Go home. So I did. And for like the month that I had to wear the cast, I decided, like, so this was at a time when, Chrono Trigger DS hadn't come out yet, and the Chrono Trigger ports were few and far between, and I had gotten the PlayStation version to play on the PlayStation 2 that I had bought, and so I decided, like, this is it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to play through Chrono Trigger on PlayStation. Of course, that version had, tons of technical issues, right? Like it had long load times that were caused by the way that they handled the translation in the game. It's really a weird thing, but like these long load times, like there's no way I would have put up with that if it hadn't been for the fact that I had nothing to do. I was home and I had it in my mind, like, I'm going to play through this thing. So, it was not super easy to play with the hand and the cast, but it was still, doable. I was playing on the not the active mode, but the other one, the passive, I suppose, that they must have called it. And so, like it was I don't know, it was a fun time. That's the only way I would have played through that version of the game. The other thing that I tried to do while I was recovering from a surgery that didn't allow me really to like sit on the sofa. Like my thinking was like, well, I could play a PC game. I could play a game on my laptop. Like I could just lie on my belly. Like that's gonna work, right? And so finally, after like a decade after it actually came out, I'm actually gonna play through Half-Life 2. I'm gonna do it. And then I tried to do that. I set up like a yoga mat or something. I put my laptop on the floor. I'm on my belly. I try to play this game, and very, very quickly just become super queasy. And I'm like, this is not working out at all. Why am I getting such a case of motion sickness? This is not great. And I mentioned being nauseous to my doctor next time I see them. And they were like, oh yeah, the pills that you're taking, they can have that side effect. Just makes you nauseous. Like, oh, great. Fantastic.
Thanks for telling me.
Yeah. Seriously. So yeah, I don't think I played anything. I don't remember what I did. I probably slept a whole lot. But, yep.
Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very lucky, really. I haven't had many physical health problems, especially, after, as a small child, I had quite a lot of nasty chest infections and things, but later childhood, adulthood, not a lot. There's a couple of things I've mentioned in the past that are pertinent, though, but I'll restate them here. There was one, the Christmas of 96, when I had Wave Race 64 for the N64 that we'd imported, given as a gift. I was it must have just been that last week in school before, you break up for the Christmas break. I must have got something there, and I was very ill. Lots of mucus, having to clear my throat all the time. Felt really pretty lousy. But I was still like, oh, it's Christmas. I've got Wave Race as a gift. I've got to play this. I kind of dragged myself to the console and put some time in with it. And sometimes hearing that music still reminds me of being ill that Christmas. And then really the worst illness I had as an adult was back in 03. Similar thing, except it was Easter kind of break from university. And again, it must have just picked something up from, in lectures or something round about then, and then came back, it was bad. Not as bad as quite as what you were recounting there, James, I don't think. But it was as close to like delirious as I've ever been, with a fever, certainly as an adult. And that was when I had got the import of Ikaruga for GameCube on Japan. I did not play it while I was ill. I think as I was too out of it, the hell too out of it by that, but I didn't play anything. I was just like, I just I want this to end. That was about it. But I had been playing it, and it kind of mixed in with my virtual delirium, so I was having like dreams about, black and white energy in patterns, and it was I was so fucked. It was really bad. And again, that first stage music, which is absolutely brilliant, love it in many respects, but still when I hear it, I still kind of think, oh. So I don't really have anything that much more. Rather, you had the odd thing where you end up feeling a bit wobbly and throwing up or something, but nothing. That those two will always be the ones that I think of, in this respect.
Yeah, I think pretty much everybody's got like a time I got unusually sick for me that just sticks with you forever.
Yeah. I mean, for me, just as a child, I used to get sick all the time, right? Growing up in Canada, my God, it's like that place is like a petri dish. Just because especially during the winter, you're either, you're in recycled air all the time. Like I used to have there was just a cycle where I would get sick to the point where I just knew like, oh, I'm getting sick again. I need to go out and I need to get this, and this, or like, it was like a routine. I would get sick 2 or 3 times every winter. So usually I would play like some sort of RPG or something like that, where it was just something where I could it had a clear narrative and it was kind of repetitive. I could just, focus on like, sometimes I just grinding my characters up, where like I literally, if I didn't feel like thinking, I wouldn't have to think at all. So always RPGs are always kind of a go-to if I'm sick or just, because they're slow paced. You can kind of go at your own speed, and usually once you kind of figure out what you need to do to level up your character, you can just go. So,
Yeah.
that's typically what my go-tos in general.
The weirdest video game, this isn't about playing a game while I was ill, and I definitely wasn't that ill. It was almost asymptomatic. But my experience with COVID, it affected my taste in one very specific element. So I could taste everything as normal, except for one thing. Condiments.
Huh.
Condiments. I'd heard this, through, it didn't happen for years, through the pandemic. But then when it did, it's like, I didn't have a fever, wasn't, struggling to breathe, anything like that. But one day, I had some ketchup on something, and it's like, oh, this tastes like the vile taste that people talk about when they've had COVID. Like, sometimes everything tastes like that to them, but it was just ketchup and some other, I don't know whether it's the vinegar in it or something somewhere. It was just like, everything's right except this, and this is completely wrong. And what it reminded me of was a story that I heard at the time about, do you ever hear this thing about Resident Evil and the supposedly, the composer that like pretended to be deaf? Have you heard this?
What?
No, I've never heard this.
There was
Yes,
a composer, a composer on Resident Evil that had, kind of this thing got going that, oh no, he composes things, but he's lost his hearing. It's a modern day Beethoven scenario or something, and like it turned out to be total bullshit, right? And somebody else was doing the composing and stuff, it was but that whole like fraud or whatever was going on there, it created this scenario where there were certain tracks in Resident Evil that, like they had the wrong instrument in it, right? Like it was just miscoded somehow. So it was like it was playing the wrong kind of synth, type of synth for like a particular kind of line. And then it never got corrected, presumably because of this whole charade about the fact that the guy was deaf. And that's how I felt when I was tasting the ketchup. Was like, it's like my brain is playing the wrong instrument for a piece of music. Like that was the only way I could make sense of what was happening to me. That's the weirdest illness, sort of video game connection that I could come up with. And also that story is just too stupid not to pass on again, because that is absolutely bizarre. I guess it's just one of these things that probably got going, somewhat by accident, and then it was too embarrassing to kind of walk it back, so they just perpetrated it further. Crazy.
Yeah, there's a somewhat famous track from the second game, I believe, that is historically referred to as clowns farting in the basement.
Yeah, that is precisely that's exactly what I was. It's like, yeah, and it's just like that. That's what my brain is doing to me when I'm tasting this. It's playing the wrong thing.
So, like, the YouTube comments read, when you use mayonnaise as an instrument, or if Comic Sans was a song. When you flush the toilet, but the water starts rising. It's like, yeah, this is bad. This is no good. And yeah, it was all part of the scandal. Oh, it's so fucking good. All right. What are we at on time? Where are we at? Okay, we're at time. All right. Well, we were going to do one more email, but we'll pick it up because we've got a few more weeks on that one. So if you sent us one asking us how you should spend your voucher, stay tuned. We'll do that next week because we still got a little bit of time left before your vouchers expire. So, email. That was it for emails. Where do you send them? rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. What do you send? Emails. What should be in those emails? I don't know. You tell me. That's what the segment's for. And that, again, is rfn@nintendoworldreport.com. So, Greg, what is our music to conclude this episode?
Well, we had a request in from someone identifying as Ravio. And in fact, yes, that Ravio, apparently, they purport to be the hero of Low Rule, I guess. But the request pertains to Octopath Traveler 2, which is about a few days after this is published. It'll be on the 24th of February. That'll be the anniversary of the game. And none of us have played Octopath 2, right?
No.
I quite enjoyed the first one. Up to a point, like there were some kind of limitations with its execution, but I did enjoy what I played of it, and there was some, certain reviews and feedback for the second one were really, really positive. It sounded, like they made some strides with it, but I don't know that they commercially necessarily did everything they were hoping for, even though they were launching. Not just on a much bigger install base for Switch, compared with back in the early days of the console, but also on other formats too. But one of the things that was definitely sticks out about the first game to me was the soundtrack. It was excellent. And not a surprise, given the pedigree and everything, but still, really well done. And so, this request, from Ravio is, for the final boss theme, which I guess is okay a year on, but although they did note a sort of favourite aspect of the final boss fight, which I will not pass on because that is a bit too spoilery, whether it's a year on or not. But certainly, as a last boss theme, it's exactly what you'd expect. Very big, very operatic vocals, squealing guitar. It's hitting you with a wall of sound in the finest kind of final boss JRPG tradition, but a very nice, very effective sort of version of that.
All right. Well, on that, it is time for us to go. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Later.
Bye-bye. And that's how I felt when I was tasting the ketchup.